will focus on the unethical history of mental asylums and how these past failures influence the way mental health care is delivered today. My name is Zaid.
My name is Yazin.
My name is Hawa.
My name is Amit.
My name is Sierra.
In our presentation, we will start with outlining the main issue. We will present the key lens that most contribute to the problem, and then we will discuss alternative solutions and potential impacts. We will introduce the main solution and why it is so effective, and finally we will close with the counter argument and its implications.
Alright. When it comes to mental health care, there has always been a persistent issue of history repeating itself. Our team is going to discuss the history of mental asylums, how those unethical practices still exist today, and what can we do to ensure effective mental health care in the future. Mental asylums were supposed to be places of healing and safety, but instead they became sites of abuse and neglect and other human rights violations. And while we like to think those days are long gone, contemporary mental health institutions still struggle with ethical issues, just in different ways. This leads to our research question of how can understanding the unethical history of mental asylums shape the development of ethical and effective mental health care today?
By using the historical lens, we analyze the history of mental asylums and their abuses. Helped us recognize recurring patterns of neglect and control, highlighting the necessity of systemic change in contemporary mental health care.
Futuristic lens was used by exploring potential advancements in ethical mental health frameworks. We assessed how future policies and treatment models could prevent past injustices from reoccurring.
Lastly, the political and economic lens were used in order to evaluate the role of government legislation, institutional power structures, and financial incentives. And mental health care reveal how policy changes and funding allocation can drive ethical reform.
The ethical lens helped investigate the moral failures of historical modern psychiatric institutions and allowed us to propose solutions that prioritize patient over illness.
Highlighting the scientific lens, we examined past and present psychiatric treatments, and in doing so, we identified how unethical medical practices such as lobotomies and forced institutionalization shaped modern mental health care and a need for ethical reform.
Asylums were often tools of control, not care. Women was committed for defying social expectations. Political prisoners were silenced through wrongful but not voices. Even today, involuntary holds and outdated mental health laws reflect the same power and balance. So any solution must also address the policies and systems that shape institutional care.
To understand why reforming is necessary, we have to look at the past. Mental asylums weren't about treatment at first, they were about control. Patients often committed without consent were constantly stripped of their rights. Women, especially those who defy social norms, were institutionalized for things as minor as postpartum depression or just simply being too emotional. Racial minorities faced even worse treatment, with some institutions using enslaved people and poor immigrants as test subjects for experimental procedures. Science wasn't used to heal, it was used to justify cruelty. Many of these so-called treatments were seen as progress at the time, highlighting the underdevelopment of the field. Over 40,000 lobotomies were performed in the US, many without informed consent. One example is Dr. Freeman's lobotomy on Rosemary Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's sister, which was thought to be necessary at the time, but in return it left her permanently disabled. This shows how early mental health care lacked ethical safeguards and ignored patients' rights.
Today, mental health care has supposedly come a long way, but there are still persisting problems. One example is the Arcadia case where a major mental health hospital chain was illegally detaining patients just to get higher insurance payouts. In 2024, a New York Times investigation found Arcadia held patients against their will to increase billing, despite those patients not meeting legal criteria for hospitalization. In many facilities, staff members lack proper mental health training, which leads to misdiagnosis, poor treatment, and even physical abuse.
Our main solution is to implement a national ethical mental health guideline. This would legally enforce facilities statewide or national-wide to ensure all mental facilities abide by the laws that prioritize patient over illness. The solution includes no institutionalization without legal review, regular checkups, and proper training for all professionals. This is effective because it prevents unethical practices like the Arcadia case, builds public trust and changes stigmatization, and ensures high quality. By maintaining ethical mental health care at a federal level, we can make sure history does not repeat itself.
Aside from our main solution, we also came up with two alternative ideas to improve mental health care. The first is community-based care. This means giving people support in their own communities instead of placing them in larger institutions. Some of the benefits is more human and easier for people to assess. It helps reduce force and hospitalization and build stronger local support systems. But there are some challenges too. It can be expensive to start across the whole country. It may not work well for people with more serious conditions. Our second solution is changing the stigma around mental hospitalization. Right now, many people avoid treatment because they're afraid of being judged or labeled. The pros of this is to focus more on the person and not just the illness. It encourages more people to get help. It leads to better outcomes by treating people with dignity. There's also cons. It takes time to change the deep-rooted beliefs. It would cost money to improve hospital spaces. Some older institutions might not want to change. By improving both how mental health care looks and how people think about it, we can make treatment more welcoming and effective.
Alright, so here's our counter-arguments and limitations. While the ethical guidelines is a step in the right direction, it may be difficult to implement across such a large system. So strict regulations could cause delays and might not work in underfunded areas. So that's a counter-argument for our own solution. Also, while community-based care sounds promising, it isn't always practical for patients with severe mental conditions who still need institutional support. We need to create a balance between learning from the past and addressing the future need of mental health. Alright, and to conclude, mental health care must evolve to accommodate the needs of people, and it must do so within the lines of empathy and hope for rehabilitation. Thank you.
Alright, so we believe that ethical reform, whether for a set of laws or community-based care or stigma reform, is the key to ensuring that all patients receive the care that they deserve.
If we want to prevent history from repeating itself, we need stricter oversight, better trained professionals, and ethical guidelines that prioritize human rights over profit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now for the oral defense questions. Paula, what is the way in which your team's resolution makes you think differently about your own individual research?
Okay, since my research being Since my research being the scientific lens, it focused based on basically the background and the basis and the sciences behind the treatments and stuff like that. But while looking at all my colleagues' work, I learned that some of the stuff that was being done just in the name of scientific like reforms wasn't always ethically right or politically right or historically right. So with that being said, wait, can you repeat the question?
So, what is one way that your team's resolution makes you think differently about your own, individual research?
Alright, with that being said, with all, looking through all of my, colleagues' lenses, like I said, it makes mine look different and it makes me learn that, you can't only focus on the scientific lens and you have to go in and look at all the other, parts to create one big solution that actually works for our problem.
Zay, describe how the content of your team presentation was changed as a result of group discussion.
So the content of our group like changed as we discussed in ways that like for example, we decided to add Sierra's political and economic review lens because we wanted to kind of venture out from the scientific and ethical and the historical part of it because that kind of like most of them interlap and intertwine with each other. So we needed something to give our solution a base, the guideline, the ethical guideline. So we used Sierra's lens and her research to like form the base for the presentation.
Thank you. Yizan, how did the group decide to use, Howard's perspective or lens, into the overall presentation?
Alright, so since Howard's research was the scientific lens, we decided to use the research that she did on these treatments to basically like figure out a way like how to reform these treatments because although back then they thought it worked, it didn't work and it had very detrimental effects on patients, so we decided to think of more ethical approaches to the problem instead of using the treatments that we used back then.
Ahmed, give one specific way that your thinking changed as a result of learning about Yizan's findings.
Because mine focused on the futuristic lens, most of mine were focusing on treatments and stuff, and I had to change, instead of focusing on treatments, I had to change how, not to repeat the historical lens and how abuse was used in past mental asylums and situations in the past. So instead of focusing on more different treatments in general, I had to focus on more ways of changing the historical aspect of the mental asylums for the better.
Thank you. Sierra, in what way did you improve your ability to work with a group as a result of this project?
I think we could improve by staying more focused and having more time in like class to like communicate with other people, like communicate with our group and making sure that we're doing our work and staying on